Hey, thanks for watching. This is Jessie, and I am going to be going over all the books that I read in 2023. So the first book I read was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, which hopefully needs no introduction. It's a cozy fantasy about an ogre and a succubus who decide to turn over a new leaf in their lives and open up a coffee shop. It's really adorable. I loved it. 5 stars. I read The Golden Spoon, thanks to Simon & Schuster for providing an ARC of this book. It's a mystery about murder at a baking competition. And while I've read books that have alternating points of views from different characters and bouncing back and forth between first person and third person, and some of those books have worked, unfortunately, this book wasn't one of those books. It's a mess. I thought it was a mess. The reviews seem to disagree with me, but that's my opinion. 3 stars. The Sweet Spot, thanks to Simon & Schuster again for providing an ARC. When I read the synopsis of this through the Simon & Schuster First Read Book Club, I thought it was going to be a light, airy, short read. It was about this thick, and it was pretty intense. It's about marriage, divorce, friendship, how these relationships make us do crazy things. 4 stars. The Ferryman, this is by Justin Cronin. This is my first Justin Cronin book. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC of this book. This is a wild retake of the River Styx myth. And so you have your ferryman who takes people back and forth between Prospero and an island where they are, from what I understand, their consciousness is reborn. It's really interesting, but it's a dystopian novel, and the ferryman begins to question everything he knows, and he catches the attention of those behind the curtain when he starts questioning. 5 stars. Read the book. What Happened to Ruthie Ramirez by Claire Jimenez. This is also thanks to Simon & Schuster for providing an ARC. This was a devastating novel about what happens to people of color, namely women, who go missing, and the apathy and indifference to their family's grief and loss, and the mental anguish that follows their family members around for years after they disappear. This one was one of those books that alternates between character points of view, and this one worked really well. The Cabinet of Dr. Lang by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, and thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This is book 21 of the Aloysius Pendergast novels. I've been a fan of these since I'm fairly certain high school. They're really good. They're supernatural thrillers. They mix paranormal, magical realism, mystery. They're phenomenal. And in this one, Constance Green has traveled to an alternate 1800s to try to save her sister, but as we progress through the book, you kind of wonder, well, who's going to save Constance? That one was 4.25 stars. Piñata by Leopoldo Gout. This is thanks to NetGalley again for providing an EARC. So Carmen is an architect from New York, and she gets the opportunity to go remodel a chapel, an old cathedral in Mexico. So her and her 2 daughters kind of take off to Mexico, and they're kind of left to their own devices while she's doing the remodeling. But there's memories and histories that kind of bubble to the surface as she's starting the renovation, and it ends up being a pretty scary, intense novel that kind of goes over the histories of the Mayans, the Incas, the Nahuatl, the Mexicas. It was really interesting. Low-key informative novel about the history of Mexico. So it was awesome, and I absolutely adored it. 4.75 stars. Dirty Poetry by Ivan L. Moody, who is the lead singer of Five Finger Death Punch. I absolutely adore Five Finger Death Punch. My best friend in the whole wide world told me that she thinks that they're basic. And that's fine because I absolutely still adore them. I listen to them all the time. I got my husband to listen to them, and we even went to a concert last year. And when we went to the concert last year, not last year, it's 2024 now. We went to a concert in 2022. And when we went, I meant to take this book with me so that if I happen to run into any of the band members, I could have them sign it, but I forgot it at home. Bummer. But it's a interesting book. It's got poetry by Ivan Moody, and then there's watercolors by an artist. I'm very, very sorry I don't have that written down at the moment, which is a huge failure on my part because the illustrations are amazing. These poems are dark and intimate. I thought it was fantastic. 3.75 stars. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I adore T. Kingfisher at this point. The first one I read by T. Kingfisher was The Hollow Places, which was allegedly a remake of Algernon's The Willows, and it was creepy as fuck. Like, no joke. Like, that stuck with me. Like, I can still imagine the thing that I imagined when I was reading the book, like down in the basement with the hair floating through the water that wasn't hair. Like, from that moment, and I read that part in that book, I knew I was a fan for life. This is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, which I know I've read before, but it wasn't one of my favorites by Poe necessarily, and I don't remember feeling one way or another about it. But after I read this book, I went back and I reread it, and now it's kind of climbed the list. But this book was amazing. Another great one from T. Kingfisher. Creeptastic, 4.75 stars. The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. This is the first Garth Nix book that I've read. And I have to say it was, I'm like whitewashed out. Hold on. A little better? Okay. I haven't been looking at the video. I've been looking at my notes. So I'm sorry if I've been whitewashed this whole time. So The Left-Handed Booksellers of London, Garth Nix. First Garth Nix book that I've read. I do have a few other books by him. I just haven't read them yet. This one took me about half the book to really get into. Susan is plucked from her quiet life. She's about to go to school, and she finds herself in a world that has been there, but she never saw. It's a like kind of supernatural. It was interesting. I mean, like I said, it took me like half the book to get into, but then I really got into it. It ended up being 3.25 stars. The God of Endings by Jacqueline Holland. So Anya runs a school of art for preschoolers, and this is the story of her ancestors and how they got from centuries before, how she actually got from centuries before to the 1980s New York as a preschool teacher. She's a vampire. It's a vampire novel, even though they never actually use the word vampire in the book. And it's really interesting. I read a lot of negative reviews about it, but that's because of the slow burn style of the book, and it takes place over centuries. And I thought it was phenomenal. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 stars. The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman. And thanks to Simon & Schuster for providing an ARC of this book. Alice Hoffman has been one of my favorite authors for a while. I was afraid to read Practical Magic because I had loved the book for so long. I had loved the movie for so long. I was afraid the book was going to ruin it for me. When I finally read the book, I loved it just as much, if not more, than the movie, but for different reasons, because they are almost different stories, not necessarily in the plot and the storyline and the characters. Everything seemed the same. It felt like Alice Hoffman's book was darker and broodier than the movie Practical Magic, and I absolutely adored it. I ended up reading all 4 of the Practical Magic books as they came out. The last one was not my favorite. And I love some of Alice Hoffman's other books. White Horses stuck with me. It wasn't necessarily one of my favorite, but it definitely stuck with me. And every time I think of horses, I think of arias because of that book. And I loved The Dove Keepers. I loved the Museum of Extraordinary Things. I think that was the title of it. This book, oh my goodness. I don't know whether it's because I got an ARC of the book and it wasn't the completed version, but it was so disjointed. So the first half of the book had me following this girl who escaped from like a cult, and I think I might be misremembering this, but it kind of follows her storyline, and then in the second part of the book, something switches, and then we switch to something else, somewhere else, someone else, and it just completely threw me for a loop. Now you have to understand, I love magical realism. I love supernatural elements in stories, but this just didn't work. I can't tell you why. I couldn't. I gave it 3.5 stars. The bump to 3.5 was only because it was Alice Hoffman, I think. I'm a little biased because it's her. Otherwise, it probably would have been under 3 stars. The Sinister Booksellers of Bath by Garth Nix. This was... Thank you to Nat Galley for providing an ARC of this book. This was the reason I read The Left-Handed Booksellers of London, because I wanted to read the first one before I read the second one. This one was better than the first one, in my opinion. There's a labyrinth, there's a clock tower. It's about booksellers and magic, so it couldn't really go wrong. But still, 3.75 stars. It wasn't phenomenal. You Were Always Mine by Christine Pride and Joe Piazza. And thanks to Simon & Schuster again for providing an ARC of this book. So this book follows Cinnamon. Cinnamon has a lot of secrets. She keeps those secrets from everybody, even her husband. She's created this whole past that never happened to kind of distance herself emotionally from her past. She meets this girl in a park, and the girl is pregnant. And then one day the girl stops showing up at the park. And then a little while later, like a couple days later, there's a baby in the bushes at the park. And so Cinnamon, she goes and gets the baby, and she's going to take it to the police station. And then at the last second, she finds a note tucked into the baby's blanket, I believe it was. The baby is the girl's baby, and she wants Cinnamon to raise her. And at this point, the girl has chosen Cinnamon, I think probably because of some of the lies that Cinnamon has told her at this point. And Cinnamon finds herself in a role that she never expected to play. She's a black woman raising a white baby. And her husband, who has dreams of building a restaurant on like a bayou, I think it is. No, that's not right. Maybe like swampland. I can't remember, but he's got dreams of building a restaurant, and he's like, you don't understand. It might be fine for you to go into like a restaurant or a grocery store with this baby, because other people are going to be like, oh, look how cute with her, the baby with her nanny. But if I go into stores, because as a black man, if I go into stores with this child, I am going to be questioned all the time. And so this is kind of a point of consternation between Cinnamon and her husband, and they get into it. And eventually he kind of distances himself from the situation. He says he's going on, he's going away for a little while. He doesn't tell her, whether or not he's going to be back, but you kind of get that impression that, at this point it's just too much for him. And he's not going to be able to deal with what comes with taking on the responsibility of a white baby. It was a really, really well-written book. I ended up crying. It was amazing. And of course, Cinnamon's past ends up getting dredged up, which is another part of the book that was really devastating. Excellent story. 4.75 stars. Bring Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin. Now, thanks to Simon & Schuster. No, not Simon & Schuster. Thanks to Nat Galley for providing an ARC of this book. Now, Rachel Griffin is a guilty pleasure because she writes YA magical realism, and she's got all the YA tropes in it. I don't know, but she just writes wild so well. And that's what draws me into these books of hers, that, aside from the magic, aside from the romance, she writes wild. Like, you can feel the wild in the woods, the wild in the ocean, the wild, wherever she's writing, you feel the wildness that's there underneath all of the progression that has happened over the last so many centuries, with buildings and neighborhoods and people and everything. You can feel the wild in her writing, and that just absolutely drew me in, and I loved it. 4.75 stars. Someone Somewhere Maybe by Sophie Diener. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. These are poems. It's a book of poetry, and they touched something in me that's been dormant for a while. I used to write poetry. Sometimes I still throw out a few lines in a notebook, but for the most part, it's been probably about 10 years since I've seriously written poetry. But I used to write it all the time, every day, for hours on end sometimes. And this one really had me thinking back on when I used to write poetry and the people that I used to associate with when I wrote poetry, because I had friends from All Poetry and different sites and different places where I interacted with different poets, and so this was definitely interesting. There were poems about grief, but they were also juxtaposed with poems about hope, and some of the poems really said to the reader, be kinder to yourself, and that ended up really touching me. It was a phenomenal debut by this poet. 4.5 stars. The Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This is my first Darcy Coates, and I was pretty impressed. So you have Krista, her boyfriend Kiernan, who are on a bus to a mountain lodge. There's other people there. You get to know the characters. Then there's the bus driver, Brian. Now, as they're going down this road towards the mountain lodge, the bus driver stops because there's a felled tree in the road, and he and the other people on the bus are trying to clear it out. At this point, Kiernan kind of pulls Krista aside. He said, "Hey, walk with me." She's thinking that he's going to pop the question, because she's been expecting this for a while. And while they're walking, a storm hits suddenly, and a gust of wind kind of pushes her off the ledge. He tries to grab her, ends up tearing off her mitten and part of her skin. She lands in the snow, and when she comes to and gets, she's eventually found by the bus driver, Brian, who went out looking for her. And he takes her back to a hunting lodge that they've come to, where they're ending up having to stay because they weren't able to clear the road and the storm is really bad. And then people start dying. It was really interesting. I enjoyed the book. It was pretty intense, and I'm looking forward to reading more of Darcy Coates. 4.25 stars. Edge of Sleep by Jake Emanuel, Willie Block, and Jason Gurley. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This is mainly about Dave. Dave has some nympathy. When he sleeps, he dreams about evil elephants and sentient whales. Stay with me, because it's actually a phenomenal book. So on July 4th, him and his coworker / friend ditch work, and they go to a party. When they get to the party, it's already on the down slope. Like, people are sleeping, people are gone, people are drunk, passed out. And they go to wake up one of their friends and find that he's dead. So instead of, I can't remember whether they called 911 and weren't able to reach anybody, which would have made sense in the book, or whether they just threw him into their car and took him to the hospital. But they threw him into their car, took him to the hospital, only to find out that there's so many dead people. And what's happening is when people go to sleep, they die. And so here starts the story with these characters who are trying to stay awake. And you see people coming into the hospital, and they're sick, and then they go to sleep in the waiting room and they don't wake up. And it's pretty crazy. This is a unique and intriguing story. And I've always been obsessed with sleep disorders, dreams, nightmares, you name it. I've always been obsessed with that. It was actually a phenomenal story right up until the end. The end was weird. It felt like the three authors were like, no, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, and then they were like, okay, let's just put it all in there together. It was a mess of an ending, but still 4 stars. The Quiet Room by Terry Miles. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This is the next installment of Rabbits. And if you haven't read Rabbits yet, please go read Rabbits. I absolutely adored it. And when I got offered to read the next installment of it, I was floored. I was like, oh, yay, yay, yay. Me reading the first one, it made them notice. Probably not. They probably just saw that I left a review and were like, okay, send it to her. But still, it made me feel really happy because this is another phenomenal book. It follows Emily, who is allegedly in Rabbits. I'm going to have to go back and reread it because I don't really remember her too well in it. But she kind of slides into another dimension while she's playing Rabbits. And the dimension that she slides into, she can't find the game. Because in all of the dimensions in the multiverse that they've been to, Rabbits is in all of them. They can find them. It's really hard to find because it's a secret game. But she can't find it here. But she feels certain that it exists there because she feels echoes and hints and like reverberations of the game. She just can't find it. I mean, this is, you know, with Rabbits, they had like a lot of name dropping too, and this one does the same to movies, music, architectural designers, artists, etc. Like the name dropping is heavy, but it doesn't take away from the story. It makes it that much better, and it's pretty amazing. But the nod that lit me up to 5 stars was the nod to the 5.5-minute hallway from House of Leaves by Mark Danielewski, and that did it for me. I'm still obsessed with the Rabbits game and the Rabbits books and the Rabbits. Terry Miles, please keep writing. My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon. Thanks to Simon & Schuster for providing an ARC of this book. I have read Jennifer McMahon before, but only one other book. I remember absolutely loving it. I just haven't gotten around to reading other ones by her. This one, it's about Allison. She's a mom and a wife. Her husband and her children are absolutely obsessed with Christmas. She is not so much obsessed with Christmas, but she does, you know, the normal person thing and puts on a smile and makes happy and joy for the holiday season for everybody. She had a terrible childhood. After her father died, her mother went nuts and literally put that nuts on Allison and her brother. When her brother aged out, he ran to the other side of the country and never looked back. Now, Allison has received a call stating that her mother is dying and her mother wants to come live with them and kind of get close to family before she passes away. Despite her reservations, Allison lets her mother come and stay with them, and there's the beginning of the horror story. It was really good. I enjoyed it. It was terrifying. 4.5 stars. The Future by Naomi Alderman. Thanks to Simon & Schuster for providing an ARC of this book. I don't even know how to describe this. Dystopian, sci-fi, horror, I don't know. Indictment, manifesto, I don't know. It was crazy. So Martha grows up, this is the book I think I was thinking of earlier. So Martha grows up in a doomsday cult. She escapes. She creates her own life, ends up working for a social media giant, and she thinks that the cult kind of dissipated after her leaving because it was run by her father. But when she is in a mall, there's a murder attempt on her. I don't think she realizes it at the moment, but there's a shooting. She almost gets shot, and something pops up on her phone. It's an app on her phone, and it tells her where to go to hide so that the person who's running after her, because at this point it doesn't take long for her to realize that they're following her because she went into the hallways that are behind the stores in the malls, and she's like, there's no reason for them to be back here unless they know that's where I went and they're looking for me. So this app is helping her escape from this murderer, from this active shooter, and she has no idea where the app came from. And so this ends up being like a much bigger issue. It's concerning social media companies, multiple social media companies, a place at the end of the world. It's a fascinating book that questions all the things that worry us that we don't really want to admit that we worry about, such as global warming, mass extinctions, big bad tech companies, and their refusal to adhere to any kind of decent privacy standards, the lengths that the rich are willing to go to keep their riches, and also how they think that they're immortal. So it was a good book. It was a good book. I gave it 4 stars. It was a good book. Definitely worth reading. Under Her Eye by, this is a collection, it's a collaboration, but the editor is Lindy Ryan. It is the follow-up to Under Her Skin. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an ARC of both of those. I actually read Under Her Skin in 2022, and this one I read this year. It's the follow-up. This one has less body horror. Thank you. I don't like body horror. I'm sorry. This one is a little bit more survive the abuse kind of thing. My favorite poem was Tarantella, 4.5 stars for this one. Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So I know that every booktuber and their brother and uncle and daughter and wife and everybody has all read John Gwynne and they love him. This is my first John Gwynne. I love him. So, I've been chasing this high that I had one moment in my life, and that was when I was in middle school. I painted my room dark blue. I had a Nirvana poster on my wall. I had a picture of Metallica that one of my friends had drawn up on my wall. I listened to STP, and I started reading The Wheel of Time and got through the first 7 books in less than, I don't know, how many months are we in school? Less than 9 months. I got through the first 7 books. And I've been chasing that high reading ever since, and this gave it to me. And I was so freaking excited. I was laying there in bed, and I was just, bloody scenes, and I'm just sitting there in bed smiling, and I'm sure I look like a nut. Thank God nobody saw me. But honestly, it's because of the way that the book made me feel as a reader. I can't quite put it into words, but there it is. 5 glorious stars for Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. I can't wait to read more. Breakup from Hell by Anne Davila Cardinal. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an ARC. This is a cute little YA book with all the tropes about some kids who live in a boring town in Vermont. And then Sam and his sister Rona move to town, and one of the girls, he takes an interest in one of the girls, and the sister doesn't like this. And it all ends up being like the town is a place where a whole bunch of people with a history came together to raise their kids in a safe community, and this kind of blows it all out of the water when Sam and Rona shows up. So 3.25 stars. Cobalt Red by Siddharth Kara. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This book is one of those books that's going to stick with me for the rest of my life because cobalt is the new diamond. So you have inhuman practices. There is no humane sourcing for cobalt, regardless of how many shell companies it goes through, how many times it's sold, how many countries it's sold to, and the big circus rigmarole that it goes through to get to the big companies that use them in every single lithium-ion battery in your cell phone, in your tablet, in your laptop. Anything that has a rechargeable battery has a lithium-ion battery in it, and that lithium-ion battery has cobalt. And there is no humane sourcing of cobalt. There's not. And this book made me feel so completely fucking helpless because I can't do anything about it. I rely on these devices not only in my personal life, but my job as well. I have these devices. They are rechargeable. What am I supposed to do? And that's how I ended up feeling at the end of this book. Still, 5 stars for breaking my fucking heart. Thank you. Earthlings. Oh, goodness. Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I regret spending money on this mess. I think it was only $1 because it was on sale, but I regret spending that $1. It's the worst dollar I've ever spent. Pedophilia, non-consensual sex, incest, body horror, cannibalism. I cried. Like, literally, when I finished this book, I was laying in bed. My husband was next to me sleeping, and I wanted to wake him up and have him hold me while I cried. And then I thought, no, I don't want anything touching me because it was such a horrible book and I felt disgusting for reading it. It was just such a short book and I thought something has to redeem it. It didn't. And I didn't want him touching me. I didn't want the blankets touching me. I didn't want my feet brushing up against my puppy at the bottom of the bed. I was a mess. And so I lay there and I cried and I felt that the world was off kilter. Negative fucking stars. Wayward by Amelia Hart. This follows women down generations in the Wayward family and the brutality that's afflicted on them because they're witches. It's alternately heartbreaking and anger-inducing, but it was a phenomenal book. 4.75 stars. All Systems Red by Martha Wells. The first time I read this, I wanted to gobble up the entire series all at once, but for whatever reason, these books aren't going down in price. Not the physical copies, not the e-copies. That just, why are they so expensive? Because they're good. But finally, John bought me all of the entirety of the series, and I reread this one, and it's still 5 shiny stars. The Unsettled by Ayanna Mathis. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. Ava and her son are kicked out of their house by Ava's husband when he finds out that her son's father stopped by. Even though Ava kicked him back to the street, nothing happened. In her husband's mind, something happened. So he kicks them out. They end up at a homeless shelter. And then her son ends up skipping school to go hang out with other homeless people at a homeless camp. And his father ends up leading these people into a kind of cult existence. And she's kind of led into a fake normal for a while. And it's alternately told by the by Ava's mother, Duchess, who lives in Louisiana. And she has her own opinions on Ava's childhood, which kind of, they're different from Ava's views. It was a really interesting story. 4.75 stars. Artificial Condition by Martha Wells, the next book in the Murderbot series. I absolutely adored it. This follows Murderbot after he is given the chance to metaphorically grow fat and happy. Instead, he runs away from the compound or the planet where these people who gave him his freedom live. He ends up on a transport ship, and it's run by Art. That's not his actual name. It's the name that Murderbot calls him, which stands for the Asshole Research Transport. It's a great book. So good. I love these. 5 Sanctuary Moons. 5 stars. The Night House by Joe Nesbo. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. Richard goes to live with his aunt and uncle after his parents die. He's a bully, and he's angry, and he's taking it out on his schoolmates. But when his victims / friends kind of start dying, and the attention is turned on him that's the lead in into this horror story. This is my first Joe Nesbo book. I was really into part 1. Part 2 kind of confused me. Part 3 kind of tied it all up together with a nice little bow, but it wasn't enough to make me feel good about part 2. So 3.5 stars. Rogue Protocol, Martha Wells, Murderbot, Part 3. Thank you. Oh, Murderbot, you snarky, sarcastic, cussing sec unit. Yeah, that's great. I love it. How exasperating it must be to just want to spend eons watching TV and serials, but having to keep saving those pesky humans. It must be exhausting. Exit Strategy, Martha Wells. This is when Murderbot's employee turned savior, Dr. Mensa, has been kidnapped, and it's time for Murderbot to save the day. Again, 5 stars. Oh, 5 stars, and Rogue Protocol also. I'm doing this on my lunch, and I just remembered that I had lunch in the oven. So, where was I? Oh, okay. Exit Strategy. So, I did start reading the book after this, and I haven't finished because I don't want to live in a world where there's no more Murderbot books, which I know sounds absolutely ridiculous, but these books are awesome. But I recently found out that it's allegedly been picked up for a series, and so I guess I got to finish the last couple books. City of Nightmares by Rebecca Schaefer. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an ARC of this book. So Ness used to have a family. That is until her sister fell asleep and became a nightmare of a giant spider and ate their father, and then went and ate the postman. So, okay, stay with me. It's actually a really good book. So now she fights nightmares, or rather her friend fights nightmares. Her friend Priya fights nightmares, and Ness kind of tries to stay away from them because she's terrified of all the nightmares. The thing is that not all the nightmares are bad. Not all of them become monsters. Some just look like monsters, but they retain their personality from their daily life. But when people dream, they can become the thing that they are most afraid of, which is where all of this is stemming from. It was interesting. There's a lot going on, but for the most part, it worked. 3.75 stars. The Lost Village by Camilla Sten. Thanks to my best friend Carol for recommending this book. 20-something-year-old Alice heads to Silvertjärn, Sweden, along with an old friend and some others to film a documentary about it. Why? Because her great-grandmother or her grandmother was the sole survivor of an entire town that disappeared decades earlier, and she wants to do a documentary about it. It was an interesting book. It wasn't all that I thought it was going to be, but it was still very well written, and they took the haunted house theme and kind of turned it on its head into like a whole haunted village, which was really interesting. It was definitely a well-written book. 4 stars. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Now, I read this for my sci-fi fantasy course, Special Topics 19th Century Dark Fantasy. Now, this is not the first time that I've read this. I read this for the first time in high school, and I was absolutely obsessed with it in high school. I was so obsessed that it's all I talked about for a long time, and whenever people would be like, hey, what book do you recommend since you read so many books? Frankenstein. This second reading isn't as awesome as I remember, but it's still really impressive. 5-ish stars. Riven by Mindy Arnett. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. An assassin and a rich heiress find that they have more in common than they thought in a land where magic is restricted to those who serve. I normally hate books with a lot of politics, and this had a lot of politics in it, but it was so well written, and the magic system was so unique. It was unique to me. I don't know that I've ever read a magic system quite like this before, and it was absolutely phenomenal, and the story just carried me along, and I read it pretty quickly, if I remember correctly. 4.75 stars, and I think there's more. I think this is the first in the series, and so I'm really looking forward to reading more in this. Where You End by Abbott Collar. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This is a unique twist on the twin theme. Kat is in an accident and it leaves her in a coma. When she wakes up from the coma, she has amnesia and she doesn't remember anything other than her twin and her twin's name. Jude has to take on teacher role, caretaker role, in addition to her sisterly role. Trying to help Kat along, but Kat starts to find that the stories that Jude tells her about their past don't really quite add up, and she starts questioning things, and the whole thing just kind of falls apart at some point and threatens their relationship. I think it was a thriller. It was really good. 4.25 stars. The Clinic by Kat Quinn. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. When Meg sees the news of her sister Haley's suicide, she is absolutely 100% certain that they got it wrong. There's no way her sister would have committed suicide. She was a rising star. She went to rehab. And so Meg uses her own addictions as a front to gain entrance into this rehab where her sister allegedly committed suicide to try to weed out a killer. Her friend / coworker / ex-boyfriend tries to talk her out of it. He says it's not a good idea, that she needs to just accept what happened or find somebody else to look into it. But she goes anyway. It was a decent read. Some parts were downright devastating. 3.25 stars. The Witch Would Not by Olivia Atwater. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. Oh, what a wonderful personification of my bookish dreams. A dark, gothic fae fantasy. It It was so darkly delicious. I absolutely loved it. Winifred goes to Witchwood Manor to honor a request made by a dying friend who wants her to watch her grandson until such time as he goes off to college. Her friend is older and she's dying, and the father hasn't really been in the picture too much, but now that Winifred is there, the father starts making appearances more often because he has taken an interest in her, which Winifred neither appreciates nor reciprocates. But when she first arrives there, she's greeted by a butler who may or may not be there, because when she talks about the butler to the cook is like, we don't have a butler. It was really, really good. And then her friend's grandson gets switched with a foundling, and so she has to go through the Fey world to find the actual boy and bring him back. It was a really good book. I absolutely loved it. 5 very biased stars. A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbeek. Thanks to Simon & Schuster for providing an ARC. Magical realism about Aubrey, who refuses to sacrifice her prized puzzle ball that she found to a well, and her 2 sisters have sacrificed 2 of their most prized possessions to the well. And that night, Aubrey starts bleeding, and she starts her bones start contorting and breaking, and it's just really horrible. And it turns into this thing where she has to move in order to live. If she doesn't move so often, then she ends up in these episodes where she's bleeding and her bones are breaking. And it follows her through the world. She goes through different places, but the thing that made this magical realism book so fascinating was that there's these doorways that open up into libraries that take you under the earth and through time and through space, and she ends up in these other places that there's no way she could have walked to. It's absolutely amazing. I absolutely loved it. Stories within stories, 4.75 stars. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I read this for my sci-fi fantasy class, and this is my first Wells book that I've read, and it was awesome. I mean, it was a short book to begin with, but when I finished it, I felt like I lived a whole different life, and I at once felt like it was too short, but also like I felt like I lived a whole different life. It was phenomenal. I loved it. I can't wait to read more. It did end too soon, I think. So 4.25 stars. Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Cyrus Shams is a drunk poet, and he also has a substance abuse problem. His mother died when he was real young. She died on a plane that was shot down when she was going to visit her brother. His father moves Cyrus to the United States, where the father works on a chicken farm, I believe. And he raises Cyrus, and then when Cyrus goes to school, Cyrus feels that his father just felt like he could give up and die because Cyrus was an adult now, and he had done his job and made sure that he made it to adulthood. Cyrus eventually realizes that he has a problem, and he tries to get sober, and he has taken up writing. And in this hobby that he's taken up, he decides he wants to write a book about martyrs. And his goal is to make his mother into a martyr, and possibly himself. And yes, that means what it sounds like it means. And then he sees that there's this artist who's dying of cancer, and she has moved into a museum in New York where she will stay and talk with people who want to talk with her until such time as she dies. And he thinks it's a wonderful idea. He wants to talk to her and possibly include her in his book of martyrs. And his roommate slash boyfriend slash, there are no words that can explain what their relationship is, convinces him to go ahead and go. And he flies with him to New York. And Cyrus goes and he meets this woman at the museum and has no idea how much that this woman is going to turn his life upside down. It was a very interesting story. 4.25 stars. The Book of Doors by Gareth Brown. A huge thanks to NetGalley for providing an ARC of this magnificent book. Cassie and Izzy are roommates. and they live a somewhat mundane life. They're in their 30s. Cassie works for a bookstore. Izzy works at Bloomingdale's. One day, one of Cassie's customers dies in the bookstore, and he leaves her a book. And it's called The Book of Doors, but inside there's writing she doesn't understand. There's pictures that she doesn't know what the relevance is, but she takes it home. That night, she's talking to Izzy about her time in Italy. And when she gets up and says, I'm going to bed, and she goes to her bedroom and opens her door, the door opens to Italy. And so begins this crazy story about a book of doors that it says any door is every door. Any door is every door. And of course, there's people who want the book for its power, and there's other books that have the magical qualities like this. It was a really, really interesting book. And oh my goodness, where has this book been all my life? 5 stars. 5+ stars. The Backyard Bird Chronicles by Amy Tan. So thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. Amy Tan, you know her, you love her. And this is a kind of like a gateway into her life that maybe as a reader of her novels we haven't necessarily seen before. It starts in 2017 when she starts taking an interest in birding but has no inkling about birds and the different types of birds and how many birds and what they do and their personalities and characteristics. It goes through 2020 when COVID hit, and it ends at the end of 2022, and it's just a phenomenal book. You see the progression from not only her understanding of birds, but the art, because she is drawing these birds as well. It was a beautiful book. It's something I'm going to have to get in hard copy because the ebook of this with her drawings just doesn't do it justice, but it was still an amazing book. 4.5 stars. This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer. Thanks to NetGalley for providing an EARC. This is loosely based on the Dyatlov Pass incident where 9 skiers went missing and they died. It was a weird story. I remember hearing about it on one of those documentaries that they have on TV or something. But this book follows Clay, Sylvia, Dylan, and Luke as they go trekking into the woods to find a rock to climb. These woods are allegedly haunted, according to the locals. Many people have gone missing in it, and of course, these young people are like, it's just stories, whatever. But when they go, Luke takes his dog Slade, who throws a fit and runs off the first chance he gets, which is actually when Luke's girlfriend Dylan leaves the tent unzipped and the dog runs off. Dylan is climbing and she ends up falling and not only kicking Luke in the head, but banging his head into the side of the rock wall. And he ends up really loopy. And then it gets really scary. People's personalities start changing. The ghosts start showing up. It's a really good book. The only problem I had is like the last quarter of the book was just so gruesome. Like so gruesome. I just skipped some of the parts in the end of the book because I just couldn't with the gruesomeness of the book. It was so freaking gory. Could have been a great book. Unfortunately, that the last quarter of the book just undid part of it for me. So 3.25 stars. And those are the books that I read in 2023. I'll be getting out my top 10 and my bottom 3 because there weren't really many on the bottom. But the ones that were on the bottom, or at least one of the ones that were on the bottom, were really, really on the bottom. If you watch the video, I'm sure you know what it is and it's coming, but I'll have those videos up soon. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe below.